going to be working with some special line equations as well as fraction or equations that involve fractions and two-step equations. So sometimes you're going to get a special equation where it just says y equals a number and there's no x involved. When we do that, we have to remember that we're going to go ahead and graph on our y line at -5, and we're going to end up creating a horizontal line that goes straight across the -5. So here's my y line. I'm going to find -5, which is right here, and I'm going to go ahead and graph across that. Okay, so that is the line that would look like, that would be a solution for y equals -5. Okay, so let's try another one. Let's do y equals 9. So we're going to find, there's no x involved, we're just going to go to our y line and we're going to find 9, which is right here. And we're going to draw straight across the 9 line. Okay, so that's the graph for y equals 9. So I want you to try this one. Y equals -2. So go ahead and take a second to go ahead and graph y equals -2 and then check yourself in just a second. Okay, so that yellow line represents y equals -2. So that's a pretty basic line, pretty easy to graph. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to working with when we have equations that involve fractions. Okay, so sometimes you're going to get equations that involve fractions. The first thing that you want to do is when you get these, is you want to go ahead and look at your denominator or your bottom number of your fraction. That is going to tell you that you should work with multiples of that number. And the reason we have to pick multiples of that number is because otherwise we're going to end up with decimal numbers for y, and we can't graph decimal numbers. We have to be able to graph whole numbers. So here, because I have 2 as my bottom number, I'm going to do multiples of 2. Now, you can always use 0. So yes, 0 can be used in every single one. But then beyond that, I'm going to go ahead and have to pick out multiples of 2. So when I say multiples of 2, that would be like counting by 2s. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6, and so forth. So for now, we're going to go ahead and pick 3. We have to do at least 3. So if I now substitute in, another way of reading this half times x is half of 0. Well, what's half of 0? That's 0. Half of 2. Well, half of 2 is 1. Half of 4. Half of 4, well, that would be 2. Okay? And then you're going to go ahead and graph like we did yesterday. Well, you'll go ahead and do your point. So over to 0, up to 0, so we're going to stay here. Over to 2, up to 1. Over to 4, up to 2. So there's my points. And I'll go ahead just like I did yesterday and draw my line straight through those. And then put my arrow at each end. Okay, so there's my line for y equals half of x. All right, so let's try another one. Let's say instead of half, we do, oops, yep, that's what I wanted. Y equals 1/3 x. Okay, so our bottom number tells us we need to pick multiples of 3. Okay, so we can always use 0. And then multiples of 3. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. And you can also use the negative multiples of 3. So if you wanted to use -3, -6, -9, you could do that. Okay, so now if I substitute in, I have a third of 0, or times 0. Well, that's still going to give me 0. Okay, a third of 3 this time. Now, if you're not comfortable with a third of 3, you could also substitute in your x as the top number. So really it would look like this. If it's a 1, I could really look at it like this. So if I wanted to substitute 3 in here, we could do 3 divided by 3. that's going to give me 1 for my y. And then if I did a third of 6, well, it's like putting a 6 where the x's. 6 divided by 3 is going to give me 2. So now I'll go ahead and graph those points on my line. So over to 0, up to 0, over to 3, up to 1, and over to 6, up to 2. Okay, and then I would go ahead and graph my line through that. But just to save some time, I'm not going to do the line. You guys will do the line with the arrows at both ends. Okay, so I want you guys to try this one. Okay, so I want you to go through and pick your x's. And then you're also going to graph this one out. So let's do y equals 1/4 x. And just remember that this is helping you decide what you're going to use for your x's. So go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this. Also, so you're going to get your x's and your y's, and you have to do 3 of them. And then you're going to graph that line out and check back with me in just a minute. So go ahead and pause the video and work your way through this equation. Okay, so if you use the x's of 0, 4, and 8, you should have gotten 0, 1, and 2. And if you didn't, you should still have a line that looks similar to mine over there on the left-hand side of the screen. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move on to two-step equations. Okay, when we work through a two-step equation, our first process is we have to work to solve to get y by itself. Now, you guys have done these before, so this is not something new. We did these back in chapter 1. It's just that now I'm combining it where you're going to substitute in and you're going to go ahead and graph those. So if I'm going to solve for y, because I always want it to say y equals, I like to box around just for that visual to tell me, okay, I'm going to leave that one alone and I'm going to get rid of anything else that's on that side of the equal sign, right? So right now I have a minus 3x, I'm going to say plus 3x. And remember, we cannot write the plus 3x right underneath the 6 because the 6 does not have an x. So I have to write it out behind, so plus 3x. Okay, so I now have 3y equals 6 plus 3x. Okay, I want to get y by itself. So my next step would be to go ahead and divide by 3. Okay, it's gone there. Whatever I do to that side, I have to do to each number on this side. Okay, so now I have y equals 6 divided by 3. Whoops, that's a bad equal sign. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Plus 3 divided by 3 is 1. And my x. Now, when you guys are working through these, you are used to seeing the x in that front position. Okay, so when you go through and work this out, you can also flip-flop these two. Okay, if you flip-flop them though, you have to make sure that this symbol goes with that number that's behind it. Because if there happens to be a subtraction sign there, you have to remember that that's a minus in front of that number and it has to stay with the number. So you guys are used to seeing it like this, y equals 1x plus 2. Okay, now I can go through and I can pick my x's for this equation. And I would get the same thing if I did this equation. It's just that as we move on, you're going to want to have that x in this first position behind the equal sign. So there's not a fraction involved. I can pick any 3 numbers. I like to pick the smallest one, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so 1 times 0 is 0, plus 2 gives me 2. 1 times 1 is 1, plus 2 gives me 3. And 1 times 2 is 2, plus 2 gives me 4. So then I'll go ahead and I'll graph out these coordinates, just like we did yesterday and just like we did earlier today. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another one of these two-step equations. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and solve for y. So we wanna get y by itself. The nice thing is on this one, the y is by itself, it doesn't have a number, but we still have minus 3x on the same side of the equal sign. So plus 3x to get rid of it. Plus 3x. I now have y left alone equals 1 plus 3x. You guys are used to seeing it with the x in that first position, so I'm gonna go ahead and rewrite it. Y equals, my x is a positive 3x, so 3x, and this 1 is a positive 1, so plus 1. Okay, so now if I substitute, I'm going to use 0, 1, and 2 again. Okay, so 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1, so 0 plus 1 is 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 gives me 4. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 gives me 7. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and I'll graph those on my graph and make sure that they make a line. Okay, so I want you guys to try this next one on your own. And I want you to work through it. And I also want you to go ahead and solve the x's and the y's. Okay, so for your x's, go ahead and use 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so you're gonna isolate to get y by itself, and then you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna solve to get what your new y's are. So go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this equation. And then when you're finished, you can start the video back up and check yourself. So work through the equation and then also graph that line. Okay, so in the end, you should have ended up with y equals negative 2 minus 3x, which if I rewrite that would become y equals negative 3x minus 2. Okay, then for your y's, when you substitute it in, you should have gotten a negative 2. And then when I substitute in 1, that would give me negative 5. And when I substitute in a 2, it would give me negative 8. So if I graph these, it would look like this. So then you should have had a line that cuts through this way. And looked like that with arrows at both ends. Okay, so this lesson was just combining two previously taught things and then having you graph them out. So the key thing is that you're working to get that y by itself. So we're going to try one more where we're going to go ahead and isolate, and then we'll discuss out how we could pick out for our x's. So here I've got where I want to isolate and get y by itself. So minus an x, minus 1x. And the reason I'm putting the 1 in there is I see that I'm going to be doing some division. So divide by 3 to get the y by itself. Divide by 3, divide by 3. So I end up with y equals, I'm going to go ahead and put my x first, and I have to remember that that negative sticks with that 1/3. So negative 1/3 x, and then this would give me 12 divided by 3 is 4, and that's a positive 4, so I'm going to say plus 4. Okay, so for my x's, I'm going to want to pick, so you can see that negative letter. I'm going to want to pick multiples of 3. So I always like to use 0, 3, 6. Okay, so that's just another one that you can go through and practice. So if you want to go ahead and pause your video and work your way through that equation so you can see what the line looks like, go ahead and do that. Pause the video now and work your way through it. Okay, so that's what you should have ended up with when you graphed through that equation. Okay, that's all I have for this lesson. Just keep plugging away at those 2-step ones. I know those are the ones that are probably going to be the most frustrating for you. But just remember, it's not learning from scratch. You guys have worked with isolating y before. Good luck with these, you guys.